Yes, welcome to another series of the video on the accounting software we built for your company. We have explained what the chart of account is all about, how you create account and subcategories of account. Now we proceed to posting a transaction. And from the transaction here, we have the previous transaction you've posted already. You can filter the transaction by an account. You can equally search filter by different kind of account. And then you may decide to refresh. And then from here, you may decide to search for transaction by date range. If you select, let's say from here, maybe from here you want to generate a quarterly report. So if I select an account, if I put filter here, or maybe I select this, and if I decide to select an account, let's say from this date to another date, so I will be able to get all the transaction. And if I click on this search, so let me refresh. Here is where you can export to Excel. As you can see now, you can export the whole of this transaction to Excel, and you can post a new transaction from here. We have two categories of a transaction: the transaction with credit or the transaction with debit. I want to use the account we created earlier as an example. When you select this, when you are making a debit transaction, it's a positive transaction. So I want to select Swipe Tech Limited I created earlier. So initially when you create the account, the account is empty, it has zero balance. So now we want to add some kind of a debit transaction on the account. So if you're adding a debit transaction to the account, let's say I want to add a debit of a 50,000 naira to the account. I say, okay, deposit received from somewhere. I can put the transaction date. You may decide to choose a previous date, or you choose the date that this transaction occur. And when you post it, remember that that Swipe Tech Limited is an account, and we posted just one single transaction on it. We can select another transaction. Let's still post it to that same Swipe Tech Limited. And let's say this time around we have another 100,000. Let's say annual saving. Can just call it annual savings. Let's say, okay, when I receive it in this date, I save it, so I can equally filter this transaction by select the account. Here I want to see what transaction has occurred on the account. I can say that I have a deposit receipt for somewhere. This is the amount. The credit is zero. This is another deposit. The credit is zero. Before I post this transaction, the initial balance on the account was 0.0, and after posting the transaction, the initial balance is the balance is what, 50,000 naira. So before this transaction of 100,000 naira occurred, the initial balance is what, 50,000 naira. After the transaction has been posted, we have a balance of what, 150,000 naira. The reason is this: the transaction we posted so far are debit, which are positive. So just like when you say debit, we say, okay, we want to save. We count any savings that comes into that account, the account that is associated with this, as normal savings. So now we can say, okay, we want to make another transaction. We want to make a credit transaction. So when you select a credit transaction, take note that when you select a debit transaction, you only see a source account. But if it is a credit transaction, it means that you want to carry out two transactions on at the same time. So it means that the source transaction, let's say we want to take some form from Swipe Tech Limited and we want to use it for any of, let's say for church building, we can say, okay, we take 30,000 naira, let's say construction of church, let's say church windows. So the transaction date for this, let's choose this and let's save it. So if you save it now, if you go back to what we have here, you will now say that, okay, under the Swipe Tech Limited here that we previously select, you can filter it, of course. If I refresh this transaction, if I filter this, let's say Swipe Tech Limited, you can see now that 3 transactions occur. We have here the debit is what 0, the credit is what 30, the credit which is 30, and the balance before we post this credit was 150, and after we post the credit, the balance after is what 120, because there was a credit of what 30,000 naira, which we classify the credit in accounting as a negative and the debit as positive. So here we have the balance after to be what 120. So we can refresh our transaction to give us what we have, and we can filter the transaction by what? By date range. So from the date range here, if you want to generate, let's say like an annual report or let's say quarterly report, you can select a transaction from one date, between one date and the other. And when we select a transaction between one day and the date and the other, let's say from this date to this date, and we can click on search, and the system will bring all the transaction within that specified date range. And don't forget, let's recap again. You can post a new transaction. We have 2 types of transaction here. We have the debit, we have the credit, and when it is debit, you select here. That means you want to save to that account. When it is credit, maybe you want to move money from one account to another, and the system will keep track of it. Remember, you can't actually delete a transaction, and you can search for a transaction here, and you can equally export the transaction to Excel. When you see, if I click on export, it actually export the transaction to Excel. One more thing you seen is we posted transaction to Swipe Tech Limited, this account to Swipe Tech Limited. This Swipe Tech Limited has 3 transactions. So what I explained the other time, let's try and delete this Swipe Tech Limited. So because we posted an account, we posted a transaction on that account, so it is not possible for us to delete an account. Neither is it possible for us to delete sub account, a parent account that a transaction has already been posted. So it means that once you posted a transaction on an account, you can't delete it. This is what we have for transaction. If you recap again, this is where you refresh. This is where you search. When you select a date range from here, a particular date to another date, you search for the transaction. This is where you export to Excel. This is where you filter a transaction by a particular account, and you can filter it by an account and select a date range as well. This is what we have. This is what we have for transaction. I hope it is clear. And when you look at it, every transaction that occurs on a particular account is being grouped. So it means that these are the transactions that occurs under this. These are the transactions that occurs under this. These are the transactions that occurs under this. So just like this, you can play around it and make use of it and make use of the features available. So what we are going to do next is payroll. We are going to payroll now, but payroll is the next line of action I'm going to talk about, but we are going to stop here to have a separate video for it. Thank you.